From the Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, it's just the Tip-Sters with Melissa Morgan.
Hi.
If you've got a tip on anything, an unsolved true crime mystery, a case you want to know more about, the missing link between gift box cheese and Legos, anything, tell us about it by calling the Tipster hotline at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837. Or send an email to jttipsters@gmail.com. You just might hear your tip on the podcast. And now, here's your host, in her boudoir pinning up the latest glamour shot of Lieutenant Kenda, Melissa Morgan.
More cowbell. I had really hoped, producer Mark, that you hadn't noticed my my poster collection of Lieutenant Kenda's glamour shots.
It's kind of hard not to notice.
Right.
They're very compelling.
Full disclosure, if you lift them up, underneath are glamour shots of Detective Paul Holes from Contra Costa County. I'm sorry.
That makes a little more sense.
I thought if I hid them, you wouldn't be, offended. And I mean, Lieutenant Kenda has really pretty blue eyes.
Yeah, but that nipple ring, man.
That's really not for you to discuss on the air, is it? I mean,
I guess we won't discuss it any further.
Okay.
Maybe after the podcast.
Okay. Yeah, we can. I might do some taking down of old posters and putting up of new. I am just saying. And I may have a new poster to put up of a law professor I may have a big crush on at the University of Cincinnati.
No kidding?
Yeah, I'll be explaining that. So this is part 2 of Those Darn Peterson Boys, which sounds like a really bad Disney film. Remember That Darn Cat? So if they redid a 2018 version of That Darn Cat, it would be Those Darn Peterson Boys. Last week's episode was Drew Peterson was in the spotlight. This week in the spotlight, we have Scott Peterson. And next week we will have Michael Peterson bringing up the rear. I'm just saying that because he liked to collect gay prostitute porn. Anyway, the rear maybe wasn't even involved. It could have all been frontal. But anyway, back to this week's podcast. Scott Peterson, I think the case of Laci Peterson being missing for the better part of 4 months captivated the country, sadly, because of her beauty. And Scott was a handsome fellow, too. A lot of times, and it's covered brilliantly in a song by Andrew Lorand about a beautiful blonde model that went missing and everyone goes apeshit. And the same day, a less attractive woman went missing and no one gave a shit. So I think the thing is, if you think that someone's going to kill you or kidnap you or abduct you, put on some lip gloss. I'm just saying.
And take plenty of photos ahead of time.
Of you with your lip gloss on?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's good. Yeah. And speaking of glamour shots, don't get glamour shots taken. Those were atrocious, and blessedly they were run out of business. They were very popular in the 80s when I was growing up. At the mall, you could go spend an inordinately large amount of money having redonkulous pictures of you taken with like a shitload of Tammy Faye Baker makeup and a really atrocious feather boa. I mean, you could be 16 years old and you'd look like some old broken down showgirl from not even Vegas, Laughlin, Reno. I mean, it was just, they made everyone look like shit. They put 1,000 pounds of blush on. Anyway, so I'm glad it's a moot point since glamour shots are blessedly have gone the way of the beeper. So, yes, have some pretty pictures of you taken, or just be naturally attractive. Scott Peterson was a handsome fellow. Laci Peterson was gorgeous. And quite frankly, the fact that they were going to have a baby together, that baby would have been, he would have been out of this world, I'm guessing, little Connor. So Scott Peterson, born in October of 1972 in San Diego, and that's where his father and mother lived. They had kids from previous relationships, but Scott was the only child they had together. And he's Scott Lee Peterson, named after his father, Lee Peterson. And they lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in La Jolla. And his father was a quote-unquote businessman. I love that term. A businessman who owned a crate packaging business, and his mom, Jackie, owned a little boutique called The Put On. Again, couldn't love the names more. In La Jolla, actually. So, he had a pretty good life. Even though it was an apartment in La Jolla, I'm going to guess there's no Section 8 housing in La Jolla, California, which is... and no. It is one of the more beautiful places, actually, on this earth, and one of the more beautiful places in California. Mark and I have been there several
Beverly
times.
Hills on the Pacific Ocean.
It kind of is. Yeah, it's San Diego's version of Beverly Hills. I think that's a really good description, actually, Mark. Thank you. And now you can just shut the fuck up. No, I'm kidding. You can just come, you just barge in anytime you want, Mr. Bargy Pants.
I'll be quiet.
No, I'm kidding. You're fine. That was actually a really good assessment. Me just trying to say it was like a bunch of rich people. You encapsulated it beautifully. It's Beverly Hills on the Pacific Ocean. San Diego, I'm sure there are some grungy parts of San Diego, but I really don't know of many. You have to, I think, kind of look really hard, like hang out underneath the flight pattern of the airport and maybe something industrial. But for the most part, San Diego is kind of spectacular. If I'd wanted to live there, if there was more industry that I would be involved in that would be interesting. But anyway, back to Scotty. So he loves playing golf from an early age, and he got to where he could beat his dad at the age of 14. So his dad's like, we're going to get you into a college where you can become a professional golfer like Phil Mickelson. So he actually played with Phil Mickelson at the University of San Diego High School. And then by the time he graduated from San Diego High School in 1990, he was one of the top junior golfers. So he enrolls at Arizona State University, where also Phil Mickelson had enrolled on a partial golf scholarship. And Mickelson, kind of goes on to be a pretty big, successful PGA golfer. And Scott, not so much. He got thrown off the golf team by the father of another player named Chris Couch. The father's name is Chip Couch. Chris Couch was a pretty popular Arizona State golfer. And I guess they'd gone out partying, and Chris comes home and then has a hangover the next day. So Chip Couch goes to I don't know if Chip Couch just had like pockets full of money or had donated like the entire, golf department of Arizona State. I don't know how one parent has this much influence over the golf coach at a college, but he goes to the coach and says, I want him kicked off the team. And I'll be goddamned if they don't kick Scott Peterson off the team, who was a really good golfer. So they kick him off the team, and he transfers to Cuesta College in San Luis Obispo, and then later on to California Polytechnic State University. And he was going to major in international business, but then he decided to change his major to agricultural business because he figured out where he lived in California, and that could probably be big business. And there was, quite a bit of stink made about the fact that he was a fertilizer salesman for a career. He literally shoveled shit for a living, and I guess made a pretty good living at it. He was a pretty good shit shoveler. But his professors adored him. One of his professors, Jim Ahern, said, I wouldn't have minded having an entire class full of Scott Petersons. He's a model student, really good at what he does, takes it seriously. It's like, okay. So while he's at Cal Poly, he works at a restaurant in Morro Bay called the Pacific Cafe. And one of his coworkers has a visit from his neighbor. And that beautiful little girl's name is Laci Rocha. And she also attended Cal Poly. And she was majoring in, are you sitting down? Ornamental horticulture. Sometimes, when I think about the fact that I graduated from Northern Kentucky University with a bachelor's degree in radio, TV, film, which was sort of like majoring in recess, I think to myself, I would have to come to California to find a major less taxing and more fucked up than radio, TV, film, like ornamental horticulture. You major in what? Roses and succulents? I don't understand.
There's a career path that's about a millimeter long.
I guess I don't. How does one? What? Oh, I can't. Okay, so Laci, has a great major. So when they meet at this restaurant where he worked, she sort of made the first move. She was a brazen, cute little adorable girl, and she gave him her number. And he's a tall, handsome, fellow majoring in shit shoveling. And she slips him her number, and he takes a while, but he calls her. And they go out on a date. Their first date, shockingly prophetic, out on a deep-sea fishing boat. But she gets seasick. So he just apparently loves golf, fish, and murdering spouses. So the first date, she's vomiting. But she comes home and tells her mom, Sharon, I met the guy I'm going to marry. I met him, and he is adorable, and he shovels shit for a living, or he will as soon as he graduates, and he'll make a lot of money as a shit shoveler. So once he met Laci and realized they were going to be together, he put aside his dreams of being a professional golfer and really started focusing on the business part of his major. So they got married 2 years later, and I think she was a tiny bit older, like maybe a year or two older than him. So she graduated, I guess, in 97, and he graduated in 98. So when she graduated, and he's still finishing his senior year, she takes a job in what sounds like an illustrious city called Prunedale. I wonder what they make there. Prunes?
Oranges?
Yeah, probably oranges and prunes. I don't know. So in that short period of time before he's even graduated college, he has 2 extramarital affairs. I mean, they've been married a year. You would think that he could have kept in his pants, but so no one will ever reveal the name of these people or the details, but it is kind of proven, I guess, by the cops that he's had at least those 2 premarital affairs before the big one we all know about. So he graduates with his architectural business degree in 98, and they don't go immediately to Modesto. They stay in San Luis Obispo, and they open a sports bar called The Shack. And they don't borrow any money from family. They do it all on their own because their family thought, you know what? You guys are just out of college, and this is a bad investment. And it took a while to get up and running, but they did it. These 2 were a team. They fucking made a sports bar work in San Luis Obispo called The Shack.
See, I had no idea about this.
No, I didn't either until I kept researching and thought, wow, they did have, they were a team. They were a team at one time. So they open The Shack, and it takes a while to get going. And Scott actually stepped up to the plate when they couldn't find a technician to install a specific vent in this restaurant, which, as we all know who live in California, a lot of cities in California and maybe the state make it very difficult to start a business of any kind. Where we live in Santa Clarita, it's like, we're the home of the small business. We're so small business friendly. No, they're really not. I'm just going to come out and say they're awful. They're really awful. Friends that we know who've had businesses jumped through 1,000 hoops to just be squashed. We thought about opening a yoga studio up here when we moved here 11 years ago, and it was like, oh, hell no. I mean, it's not a friendly place to open a business. So these young kids graduate college and fucking push through and open a goddamn sports bar in San Luis Obispo. So they can't find this technician to do the specific vent. Scott goes to Los Angeles and takes a course on how to do this and does it himself. He fucking installs this vent himself after figuring out how to do it so they don't have to spend any money, and they couldn't find anyone to do it so they can keep their restaurant open.
You don't find people like that much these days.
I was kind of impressed.
Maybe he should be acquitted just for being a good
shut
self-starter.
up, Mark. Why are you so mean? God damn it. Anyway, maybe he wasn't always a monster. Look, a lot of guys fuck around. Doesn't mean they kill their wives. Jeez. I thought it was pretty. I gave him points. I don't care. And not just because he's handsome. He ain't my type of handsome, but he is a handsome fellow. I just thought it was pretty spectacular. I mean, he was.
I was serious.
Yeah. He should be acquitted because he learned how to install a vent. Okay. Anyway.
We need more self-starters
Yeah, more self-starters. So they sell the shack in 2000. And it really had picked up on the weekends and was doing well. And Laci wanted to be closer to her hometown of Modesto. Why? I don't know. Because San Luis Obispo, pretty fucking awesome. Modesto? No. So they moved to Modesto in October of 2000. They purchased this sweet little 3-bedroom, 2-bath bungalow for $177,000, which nowadays would probably buy them a garage, I'm going to guess. And it's in a pretty nice neighborhood. It's a small starter house, but it's in a nice neighborhood. Have you ever heard of this neighborhood, Mark? La Loma Park?
I have not.
I haven't either. They say it's the upscale part of Modesto. Mark's family, many members of his family live there, and I don't know of any upscale parts of Modesto. Anyway, I'm probably going to rot in hell, at least by the Chamber of Commerce from Modesto. I'm sure they're plotting my death right now. So Laci takes a part-time job as a substitute teacher, and Scott gets a job with a company called Trade Corp USA, which is kind of a subsidiary of a long-standing company called Spanish Fertilizer. So Spanish Fertilizer wanted to establish a customer base in the U.S., so they hire Scott as their West Coast representative. So he has a pretty big territory, California, Arizona, New Mexico. He was, doing well. And he, as aforementioned, sold fertilizer, irrigation systems, chemical nutrients, blah, 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 stuff like that for large farms and flower growers. He was doing really well as a shit shoveling salesman. He was actually pretty good. So according to Laci's family, she's really getting into the whole, I want to be a housewife and a mom, and she loves kids, and that's why she was a substitute teacher. She might have had trouble finding a job as an ornamental horticulture major because maybe they'd run out of succulents or some shit. So everyone's very excited when she, lets out the news that she's pregnant. And in November of 2002, she's 7 months pregnant. And Scott is introduced by a friend to a Fresno massage therapist named Amber Fry. Now, Amber says that, Scott said he was single, that he had lost his wife. Not yet. She ain't lost. She's still there. And they, pretty quickly begin what the press likes to call a romantic relationship. So on December 24th, literally a month or so after he starts dating Amber Fry, because there's pictures of them where she took him to like a work event that's a Christmas party, and she has a red satin dress on, and he has like a tuxedo with a red tie, and they're both just smiling like they've been together forever. On December 24th, Scott Peterson says that his wife Laci is missing. She's 7.5 months pregnant. Her due date is February 10th of 2003. And of course, we all know they had planned on naming their baby boy Connor. So the police still say they don't know the exact date of her death because her family members hadn't really talked to her since the weekend before, when they had all gone on a family trip to Carmel before Christmas. So Scott said he was fishing. He had taken the day off about 90 miles north of their house. So detectives immediately search and then become suspicious of Scott's behavior. So one of the detectives says, I suspected Scott when I first met him. It didn't mean he did it, but I was a little thrown off by his calm, cool demeanor and his lack of questioning. He wasn't like, will you call me back? Can I have one of your cards? What are you guys doing now? Now, those statements are going to come into play a little later in this pretty fascinating article by this law professor at the University of Cincinnati that was in a 3-part series in Psychology Today about demeanor suspicions and demeanor evidence.
Ooh.
People's demeanor. So the Modesto police sort of backed off at first, and they didn't, even though they suspected Scott from minute one, they didn't reveal that to the public because Laci's family and his family and friends maintained their staunch faith in his innocence. And then there were some inconsistencies in his story. And then in January of 2003, Amber Frey called the police. And she was like, I thought I was dating a single guy, and I'm dating a guy whose wife is missing. So by then, Laci's family withdraws their support from behind Scott, and they're most angry at the fact that Amber Frey said Scott Peterson told her he'd lost his wife on December 9th, which is 14 days before she actually disappeared. So when Amber Frey lets the police know that she's been dating this guy whose wife's missing, she allows the police to tape her conversations with Scott Peterson, hoping to get him to confess. So she is playing for the first several weeks. Oh, hi, Scott. How are you? Oh, you're traveling? You're in Paris? Yeah, the most famous recording is when he calls her from what he says is Paris, celebrating the holidays with his new companions, Pasquale and Francois, when he was actually making the phone call from a New Year's Eve candlelight vigil for his missing wife in Modesto, not even Paris, Kentucky.
There's a slick dude for you.
Look, I get it. And please don't make me fight with you through this entire podcast. Yes, he's a slick dude. How many slick dudes fuck around on their wife and don't kill them? I mean, it doesn't mean he's a killer. I'm not saying he's not either. I'm just saying you can be a fucking asshole and cheat on your wife 7 ways from Sunday. Doesn't mean you kill her. So on April 13th, the remains of a late-term male fetus wash up on Richmond's Point Isabel shoreline. And it's north of the marina where Peterson said he'd been boating on the 24th. So the next day, and I did not know this detail, a partial female torso floats up, and it's missing its hands, feet, and head. And they were found in the same area a day apart. And it is determined that it's Laci and the fetus is Connor. They did, autopsies on both of them. And the horrible phrase that's used to say what happened to Connor is called a coffin birth, where if the mother passes away, the baby is naturally expelled. But somehow they stayed pretty close together. It could be, the way the tides were. I don't know. But they did autopsies on both of them. And due to the decomposition, the exact date of death, the exact cause of death, none of that could really be determined. The only thing they had that was evidence of any sort of damage to Laci other than her missing hands and head was that there were some broken ribs. Now, these injuries, several people said, well, those could have been caused when her body fell into the rocks or was washed up into the rocks. But, prosecutors said that no, that happened before. And they think that she was like strangled or suffocated in their home. So when they find these bodies in April, when both of them wash up, they think we have to arrest him now. He's in San Diego. He lived there. He knows the area, and he can dart across the border to Mexico. He can figure out how to get to Tijuana. We have to arrest him now. So he's arrested at a golf course on April 18th. And he looks a little different. He has blonde hair. He had not, his dark brown hair was dyed blonde. And look, I get it, Scott. I don't know what you used, but it wasn't good. I'm going to guess you bought a box at the drugstore. I have naturally dark hair, and when I went blonde, and at the time, when I went blonde 14 years ago, my hair was dyed jet flat black. So going from jet flat black to blonde, it's not like a one-step process, Scott. So basically what you look like was you had orange hair. It was not like a good look for you. They said it was dyed blonde, but it wasn't really blonde. It was orange. So he's at the golf course, says that he's going to meet his brother and his dad for a round of golf. His Mercedes-Benz is stuffed with miscellaneous items that include $15,000 in cash, 12 Viagra tablets, survival gear, camping equipment, several changes of clothes, 4 cell phones, and his brother's driver's license in addition to his own. Now, Lee Peterson, Scott's father, said, look, he borrowed his brother's license the day before to get a San Diego resident discount at a golf course. He hasn't worked in a while, and he probably can't make as much money shoveling shit when he's under, investigation for his missing, now dead wife. So the police are like, look, Mr. Peterson, you can say your son has all these excuses for what the fuck is happening to him, including, his father said, he's been living out of his car because of all the media attention. Oh, okay. But he still had the wherewithal to go buy some blonde dye. And anyway, so the police feared that all the items in his car, the way he looked, was that he was planning to flee to Mexico. So the prosecutors were like, okay, you're right. We're going to arrest him. So he's arraigned on April 21st in Stanislaus County Superior Court. And he's charged with 2 felony counts of murder with premeditation and special circumstances. So it's first-degree murder of Laci and second-degree murder of Connor. And he pled not guilty. So before his arraignment, he is represented by Kirk McAllister, who's a veteran criminal defense attorney from Modesto who has a really good reputation. And also a public defender, Kent Faulkner, was assigned to the case. Well, Peterson indicates that he could afford a private attorney, so he gets Mark Garagos, who, as we know from the Zanku chicken murders, if you're going to shoot at a hooker and a pimp, you're going to go home. He's got a pretty good reputation. And he's a pretty interesting guy. So he's his attorney, and he's kind of high profile. And I actually thought he could probably get him out of this no matter what. And I'll explain why a little later, because I've had many discussions with producer Mark and other people quietly, because when you say, I don't think if I were on the jury, I could have convicted him, and not because I don't think he didn't do it, but because the evidence was so circumstantial and scant. As a responsible juror, I could not have voted to convict. So I actually thought, okay, he's got a chance with Mark Garagos. He's kind of a heavy hitter. He's going to do a good job. So it turns out that the judge actually allows Garagos to have the venue changed from Modesto to Redwood City because of the hostility in the Modesto area. I can't imagine anyone is less hated in Modesto other than Scott Peterson. Maybe Gary Condit. No, probably still Scott Peterson. So his trial begins on June 1st of 2004. Amber Fry is a prosecution witness, and she has her own attorney representing her, Gloria Allred. Oh, Amber, if I liked you at all, I sure didn't after that. So because Gloria Allred is representing a prosecution witness, she's not bound by the gag order that's imposed on everyone else in the trial. So she, as we all know, Gloria Allred if you put a mic in front of her and a light on her, she'll probably, recite the Gettysburg Address backward in Farsi. I mean, any kind of attention. I don't know that I know a woman who needs more attention than Gloria Allred. And I'm high maintenance. I need a lot of fucking attention. I ain't nothing compared to Gloria Allred. So she kept saying, her client has no opinion on whether Peterson's guilty, but she's obviously very sympathetic to the prosecution. She's on nightly news programs almost every night during the trial. So the defense attorneys based their case on a lack of direct evidence. And that, in this case, really couldn't be more true. The only thing that they used that was a piece of forensic evidence is one hair. One of Laci's hairs is found on a pair of pliers on Scott Peterson's little boat. One hair. She could have walked by the boat and shed the hair. She could have been sitting in the boat and a hair fell off. It's a little thin. It's a little bit thin, if you ask me. So this mountain of circumstantial evidence, which just, you can say as many times as you want. If it walks like a duck, if it talks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. I don't necessarily think that's very true. So, but it's a huge amount of circumstantial evidence. He sold Laci's Land Rover. He signed up for 2 pornographic television channels on his cable service a week after she disappeared. And they're saying, he knew she wasn't going to return. Or maybe he just liked porn. I don't know. So a hydrologist with the United States Geological Survey was an expert witness on tides in the San Francisco Bay. And it really didn't go well. During cross-examination, he admitted that his findings were probable, not precise. Tidal systems are sufficiently chaotic, and he was really unable to develop an exact model of how the bodies were disposed of and how they traveled to the shoreline 4 months later. It seems a little thin, and not even a little. It seems like a lot thin. But the 180 of that is that if the prosecution has a little bit of evidence to put before the jury and the court, the defense attorneys are wide sweeping in their theories, including but not limited to a satanic cult that wanted to kidnap Laci and take the baby, a prostitute who stole checks from the Petersons' mailbox, but she did it after Laci has disappeared, so they don't really know that had anything to do with anything. It could have just been a prostitute looking for money. The neighbors across the street had a burglary, and they were saying that Laci saw the burglars and they came back and got her and kidnapped her. I mean, Mark Garagos went down a little bit in my esteem when he literally, I felt like, was throwing all the shit against the wall to see if any of it stuck. Any of the fertilizer that Scott Peterson sold, if that could be stuck on the wall, I think he would have been thrilled. So as little evidence as they had against him, Mark Garagos, no offense, muddied the water, I kind of really think. So it was a very odd trial. If anyone followed it when this was happening on court TV, it was fascinating. But I have to say, at the time, I thought, this is not enough. He probably did it. It's still not enough.
Can I ask a question?
You can ask anything you want.
Did Peterson did not testify, or did he testify?
No, he did not.
That was okay. Because I think, and I know, all kidding aside, in my smart aleck remarks earlier, I agree completely with you. There was not enough. If this jury had behaved the way that it should behave, based strictly on the evidence, it should not have convicted.
You're right.
And what convicted him was his demeanor.
You're exactly right.
Nobody liked him. They
You're
looked
exactly
at him,
right.
and he's just his own assholiness, if that's a word, his own asshole behavior and demeanor is what convicted him, and nothing else.
You're
the
exactly
jury
right.
just didn't like him.
You're exactly right. We've had this discussion before, and I was relieved when I expressed my feelings to you, and that you didn't go, "You stupid bitch! He's guilty. He's a murderer." And I'm one of the things I admire about Canada, and not that many things, but that they have professional jurors, and I feel like people that know the law, understand the law, and are paid to be professional jurors. A professional jury pool would have to be better than any jury in this country. There is no such thing as a jury of your peers. There is not anything like a jury of your peers in the United States. If you're lucky, if you didn't do it, and as we know with many of the Innocence Project groups across the country, a lot of times you're going to be convicted because they don't like, the color of your dyed blonde hair or whatever the fuck. It's horrifying. I have only been called to jury duty a few times, and what an education. The first time I felt like I learned a lot, and not just because I got to meet Frank Zappa's daughter, Moon Unit Zappa, because we were both there. She was knitting furiously, and because we had to spend the whole day together, and I was looking across at the guy who was holding up a book that was titled Guilty with the font in dripping blood. And anytime a bailiff walked by, he would hold the book up. I thought, you definitely want to be dismissed, don't you? You're very smart. That was, I thought, the smartest thing I'd ever seen. So when I was called again for jury duty, I took Helter Skelter and held that up. But no one paid attention to me. And I'll tell you why. Because what was being paid attention to was the fact that the announcements for us involved in jury duty were in English and Spanish. And the people who spoke Spanish didn't even understand the announcements and kept going up to, the window or trying to find someone to talk to them because they didn't know what was happening. And I thought, jury of my peers right there. Just awful. So that's another whole story. Professional jury pools. I'm sorry. I feel like it's the way to go. So
I agree. That's
thank
completely.
you.
That, and if
it's one thing we agree on.
I have never actually been chosen, but I've been to jury duty many times, and the intellectual capacity of most jury pools would not fill a tiny dog dish.
Yeah.
Let alone the swimming pool you need to have to understand some of this. It's just. Generally, there are people who work for the post office who can get, unlimited leave to go on jury duty, not people who actually work for... I didn't really say that. Anyway, I'm going to stop.
No, I gotcha. I understand exactly what you're saying. I don't want to say it's people who aren't smart enough to get out of jury duty, because I think a lot of people take it very seriously. And I took my duty seriously. I understood that it was because I voted. And that's how, they find you. They track you down and find you. I'm the jury of no one's peers, and I would try desperately to understand a case, but anyway. So the prosecution presents the fact that Scott Peterson put his dick in a whole lot of places he shouldn't have. They said he had financial problems. They didn't really prove that at all. And they said that he killed Laci due to his increasing debt and his desire to be single again. Also, all of this is being surmised. We'll discuss why this happens in just a moment with the article from the attorney / law professor. So on November 12th of 2004, he's convicted of 2 counts of murder, first degree with special circumstances for Laci, and second degree for killing Connor. And the penalty phase goes on for 14 days. I don't understand that. But the jury recommends that Peterson be sentenced to death by lethal injection. He is also ordered to pay $10,000 toward the cost of Laci's funeral and calls the murder of Laci cruel, uncaring, heartless, and callous. Yeah, pretty much all murder is all those words, Judge Asswipe, who let this fucking parade of shit happen. So, unfortunately, in press appearances, members of the jury stated what they ended up convicting him of, which is his demeanor. They said his, lack of emotion, his phone calls to Amber Fry following, the days that Laci's, still missing, indicated that he was guilty. No, that really doesn't. What it indicates is that he's a flaming asshole. It doesn't indicate anything at all that he is guilty. You can't convict someone on their demeanor. And yet, we do.
Yeah, and it was not just it was the combination of them describing his demeanor around the time of the murder and his demeanor sitting there in the courtroom as they were watching him.
Yes.
That's what did it.
Yep. You're right. We've had this discussion before, and like I said, I was relieved that you didn't think I was a total asshole, and I was more relieved that you understood what happened. There's no denying he's a dick and a half, but that still doesn't mean that he did it. It's a mound of circumstantial evidence. I get it. A mound of circumstantial evidence. And one hair that's direct evidence. If the hair appeared when he hit her in the head with a wrench, if he did that. So they end up looking around that marina for homemade anchors, concrete anchors that they said he'd made. And they never found them. Those were never found. So they can't even really tell you how she died. Granted, her head and hands and feet are missing, but, they can't really, maybe she just took them off and then, no, I'm just kidding. I don't know what happened. I feel really bad. He probably did kill her, but they didn't prove a goddamn thing to me. Sorry. So let's go to this beautiful Psychology Today article by this attorney law professor, Mark Godsey. He teaches at the University of Cincinnati. He's highly involved with the Ohio Innocence Project, and he wrote a book that I can't wait to order called Blind Injustice, a former prosecutor exposes the psychology and politics of wrongful convictions. So his 3-part series in Psychology Today, which was just in mid-January of 2018, is entitled, Is Scott Peterson Innocent? And he, realizes that in his career, he'd made mistakes. He focuses on quite a few of the cases that he had as a prosecutor. And now he also focuses on the cases that he's been involved in with the Ohio Innocence Project, which has now freed 25 innocent people who, in one state, who had served a total of 471 years in prison for crimes they did not commit.
Can you repeat that statistic? Unbelievable.
25 innocent people who served 471 years in prison for crimes they did not commit. The Ohio Innocence Project.
That's the single reason why I oppose the death penalty.
And
that's
you
the
turned me
only
around.
reason.
You turned me around. It's very clear. It really pushed me back when Paul Zolo's like, well, you've said on your podcast that, they should be hung upside down. And yes, when it is clear that someone either admits that they've killed someone, there's absolutely irrefutable evidence, that, like Charles Manson, I really feel like he should be stuffed and Jose Feliciano should kill him with a guitar. I don't even know if Jose Feliciano's still alive, but it could be anyone who has a guitar. Any of the Beach Boys who are still alive who paid for his songs, they could beat him to death with a. Anyway, so this book I'm really looking forward to reading, and it highlights some of the psychological issues that get people convicted. And especially convicted on a circumstantial case. Like I said, I'm not saying at all he didn't do it. He probably did. But you can't convict someone on demeanor evidence. You can't convict someone on being aloof and unemotional. You know, the juror said he was cocky when he was on camera, and the paparazzi caught him walking to his car, and he was cocky. And what? I mean, cocky? I don't, and my best friend, Nancy Grace, who I despise with a white hot passion, I'm wearing blue eyeshadow in her honor today. She said, it looks like he's lying, he's hiding something, he's guilty. Well, it can look to you however you want it to look, Nancy. It doesn't fucking mean a thing. So Professor Godsey says in his book, there's 2,000 wrongful convictions in America as far as we know right now. That's like 3 per week. And if we've learned anything from the Innocence Projects in every state, is that contrary to popular belief, human beings are really, really, really bad at determining when someone else is telling the truth or lying. Really bad. All we have, to go on, in my mind, is our gut. But sometimes our gut isn't right about other people. Our gut should be used for us. If you have a question in your life, in your mind about something, trust your gut. If you're using your gut to say somebody else killed someone and needs to spend their life in San Quentin, your gut really has to kind of be taken out of the equation. And you have to really only look at, the evidence. I can't even believe there's something called demeanor evidence. How do you take demeanor evidence to the bank? How do you even quantify? I don't like the way he looked. I don't like the way he looked at the camera. It's ridiculous. So when it comes to our intuition, when police, and I still have the utmost respect for police officers, when the police, the media, people who just like to talk, find someone they think is aloof, unemotional, then you're guilty. Consequently, when you see someone who's over the top with grief, it looks staged. So when it comes to demeanor evidence, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. It's really a heartbreaking thing. And to sum this up, blessedly, most of us aren't going to know what it's like to have a loved one murdered. Hopefully, we, God forbid, never have to go through that. Everyone expresses trauma differently. Some people are in shock or in denial. Some people are emotionless. Some people freak out, throw themselves on the floor, and sob like babies. And neither one of those behaviors proves innocence or guilt. And if you've never had to deal with something that traumatic, you don't know how you're going to act. It's bad science, it's bad psychology, and it's bad law. It's really bad law. So one of the quotes that Professor Godsey has in his book comes from Mark Garagos. And this is something I hope everyone remembers if you're ever called for jury duty. There's no playbook for grief. And more cowbell.
Remember, if you've got a tip, call Melissa on the Tip-Ster hotline at 832-Tip-Sters. That's area code 832-847-7837, or send an email to jttipsters@gmail.com.